for it to record, and then we'll go. Right, recording. So, everyone, welcome to the UK Azure Virtual Desktop User Group. This is our July edition. So, is this our official year one, Kirk?
I think so.
Yeah. So first year anniversary. So we've been going a year now, growing all the time, which is good. So started off really strong. We continue to grow. I think on the meetup group we've got like over 600 members, which is good. We average like about 50 people per session, about 100 people sign up. So going well, continuing to grow, and hopefully we'll do some kind of in-person meetup either towards the end of this year or beginning next year. But we'll see what happens. Okay, right, so we've got a really great lineup tonight. So the last couple of sessions were kind of sort of very much vendor focused. So I made the decision to basically ditch the vendors. So sorry vendors, you banned. So all the content that we're going to have from now on is purely community focused. So if you've got something cool that you want to show off, please jump in, let me know, and we'll discuss that a bit later as well. But yeah, from now on, we're doing purely community content. So stuff, if you've done something, I mean, the presentations that we're going to be doing, if you want to, you can do like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, an hour and a half. I don't care. As long as people find it interesting, you can go as long as you want. So if you've ever wanted to present before and you fancy a shot, just contact myself or Kirk. So tonight we're going to do our usual introduction. We go over the sort of latest news of Azure Virtual Desktop. So as mentioned tonight, we've got two really great sessions. We've got Servent with us, so Des McGuire, who's going to tell us about the deployment that they did for the University of Glasgow. So that's for up to potentially 78,000 seat Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. And also we've got Marius Sandbu, who's coming on a bit later, and he's going to tell us all about security and monitoring your sort of virtual desktop environment, like so he's using Sentinel and stuff like that. So two really great and interesting sessions. So it's been recorded, so if you have to drop off or something, it's not a problem. You can catch the recording, which I'll probably upload either later tonight or tomorrow morning. And at the end as well, we've got a Q&A session. So I like to try and make these as interactive as possible. It's not just me talking at you. So if you've got any questions throughout any of the sessions, please just let us know. If you want to say something, just obviously you've got the hold your hand up feature, or you can just wait till the end of the session, or just pop the questions in the Q&A chat as well. We can sort of cover those towards the end of the sessions as well. Okay, so we'll go through the introductions. So myself, I'm Neil. I've been working in IT for way too long now. Makes me feel old. I currently work for a company called Nerdio as their UK field CTO. So we sort of specialise in making Azure Virtual Desktops really simple to deploy. We have a sort of management layer on top of Azure Virtual Desktop with a really good auto scale engine and image management features and all that stuff, but I won't go on too much about that. I'm also the co-founder of the WVD community, which is going to get relaunched soon as the AVD community, which I'll go into that a bit further. I'm also the co-founder of this, along with Kirk, of the sort of UK, damn it, I forgot to rename it, AVD User Group, which we'll go into a bit later as well. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I got my first one last year, and at least we just half an hour ago received my renewal. So year 2 of being MVP, which is pretty cool. You can find me at Virtual Mank on Twitter and also on WVD Community. That's where I mostly do all my tweeting. My website is virtualmank.co.uk. As you can probably tell, I'm from Manchester. I also post on the WVD Community, and that's my LinkedIn profile. And if you want to email me, and you can catch me at nmclaughlin@getnerdio.com. So that's me, and over to you, Kirk.
Cheers, Neil. So yeah, hey everyone, my name's Kirk. I am a principal technologist over at NetApp. I'm not tied to any particular product or projects or anything there, so I get to go and pick what I fancy to work with every month, which is pretty cool. On the side of that, I am very hands-on because I've got my own startup that does safety for cyclists and runners and all sorts of things now. You might have seen in the news, I just won a contract with Deliveroo to protect all their riders globally. So that's pretty cool, being able to do things like that, and quite a few more to mention over the next few months, hopefully. I blog about my stuff, although I haven't been too good on the blog in the last few months. But you can find the blog at Kirk in the .cloud or kirkryan.co.uk or any of those things. They'll all take you to the same thing. But what I have been active with is my YouTube. So I've been doing quite a few videos aimed at sort of intermediate expert level. And it's basically complex topics condensed down to 2-minute videos, because I'm just so bored of digital stuff. So if you're like me and you like things in 2 minutes or near about 2 minutes, then you can find loads of stuff, and it'll be building out. I've got a whole series there, and you'll find me and usually chatting away to Neil or something on Twitter. So if you want to see what we talk about and stuff, you can go and follow us. But that's me.
Cheers, Kirk. Yeah, I think everyone's getting a bit bored of stuff, so I'm glad that you all joined tonight, because I know myself, it's getting a bit like,
obviously no one's bored of this. This is obviously different.
Of course. Okay, and congrats, by the way. I didn't know about that delivery contract, so
cheers. Yeah, it's like every month's been a journey on this, hasn't it, to fill everyone in on what's happening. Yeah. So
cool. Right, okay, some of you may have seen this before. I know there's quite a few people signed up for the first time, which is good. So essentially we meet up once a month, normally the first Thursday of every month, just so everyone knows what to expect. We present basically, see, I forgot another rename, the latest Azure Virtual Desktop news and hot topics. We use Teams, obviously it's a platform, record everything, so all the previous recordings available on the YouTube channel as well, so I can send you links to that if you need it. And say hopefully some physical events, which I'm going to rename from Q1 2021 to Q1 2022. This has gone on for so long. Right. Okay. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, we are constantly looking for new content. I think we never really have to look hard. So there's always somebody who wants to sort of tell us something. So, but we're still taking sessions in for August. We've already got one session submitted, so we've got one slot left for, say, 1 45-minute session. But even if you've got like 10-15-minute session, just let us know, and we'll be happy to have you on. You don't have to be the world's greatest presenter. You don't have to present about anything amazing. If you've never presented before, not a problem. We'll help you through it. Even if it's 5 minutes, even if it's 1 minute, I don't care. If you want to present, just come on, talk about something cool. Let people know, share knowledge, because that's what we're here to do, essentially. We're here to share knowledge and to learn from each other. So that's what we're all about. So if you do fancy give it a shot, just contact myself or Kirk. Right, let's get on to the news of the week. But obviously, yeah, we've got a Slack channel that we have with AVD Community Slack channel. So if you want to have issues with Windows-based Azure Virtual Desktop, see, I keep on doing it. Just jump on there. Loads of really clever people on there, people from Microsoft and stuff. So if you've got a problem, jump on there. And we're actually going to be migrating that to a proper forum, because I think Slack, you messages just disappear and it's hard to search stuff like that. So as part of the relaunch, we're going to make a proper forum for people to use. So that'll be disappearing over the next few months. So going to the news. In this ever-changing world of Azure Virtual Desktop. So what's new for July 2021? So the first bit of news is we're going to go for a complete relaunch. So when I launched the AVD community over a year ago now, I had a big vision for it. And unfortunately, COVID, looking after family members, new job and stuff, completely killed all my time. And it pretty much stayed as just doing the newsletter and this sort of this community sort of user group meeting. So we're sort of re-looking at it and sort of deploying it to what we originally envisaged, which is a complete community built around Azure Virtual Desktop. So essentially, we've got a new domain name that we've got, which is going to be, I think it's virtualdesktops.community that we're going to be going under. And from that, we're going to do the usual weekly newsletter. Then we're going to have a weekly video roundup and a podcast once every 2 weeks, which is going to be kind of news of the week and have random guests on, stuff like that. And then we're doing Community Member of the Month. And then we're going to be creating an AZ 140 study series. So revision that to be either weekly guides or maybe just random, let's jump on YouTube or let's jump on Twitch or something and just talk about something for an hour, deploy something and stuff like that. So that's the plan for that. And then we're doing, as you just mentioned, Kirk, sort of short and sweet videos on sort of hot topics to go through. Also, we're going to have guest posts to try and sort of take the strain off us, because there's only a few of us and it's a hell of a lot of work. So we're going to invite guest posts. If you want to write about something and you don't really have a platform to speak about, contact me. We can help you put your content out there. And we're also, what always goes down well is non-technical stuff. So I know a lot of people talk about career advice, and we just talked about at the beginning of this call, sort of working from home tips and advice, and sort of mental health and mental awareness and all that kind of stuff. So stuff like us men and women sometimes don't really like to talk about. So we're going to be sort of doing all that stuff. So a lot of stuff to look forward to. Really excited to get going with it. So it's going to take us a few months to get. We're doing a complete logo redesign, website redesign, the whole malarkey. So it's going to be fun. So watch out for that in the future. So the big news, as you probably mentioned, we slip up a few times throughout this call, which I probably will do probably for the next 6 months or next year, is Windows Virtual Desktop is now called Azure Virtual Desktop. So this came as a surprise to everyone. No one knew about this. I only got told about it about 2 hours before it happened, because there's basically somebody who knew it's going on basically rang me and said, "Oh, you need to go and get this domain name sorted out because there's going to be big news coming." So, so essentially, Microsoft basically stated that they're doing that to they align the name more with the service offering, because obviously it's sitting in Azure, and also quite a few people have cottoned on, well, are they going to start offering like Linux desktops? So we suspect they are, because as many people know, half of the compute within Azure is actually runs on Linux. So I know quite a few like developers and stuff who would sort of like to run Linux desktops, for example. So we suspect that sometime in the future you could have Linux desktops as part of the Azure Virtual Desktop Service, which should be pretty cool. So yeah, that's that. So if you've wondered what the hell's going on, now you know why that is. So quite exciting. They're sort of doing a lot more. They do a lot more around. I've not put it on here, but they're doing a few more stuff around the different subscription model for applications, where they're allowing third-party people to allow to run their applications within Azure on a subscription basis. So companies like Stake Software, for example, can run their application and then charge like users £10 a month to access it, for example. So lots of cool stuff in the horizon. I can't go this without mentioning Nerdio. Obviously, I work for Nerdio, so we've got our version 3 release up and coming, which is going to be a major release. So we've got some UI improvements in there, allowing you to set your own custom views up, which is really cool. We've also got some FS Logic enhancements, so we're going to enable sort of better integration with Cloud Cache and better sort of profile functionalities. We're improving the auto scale. So we've got some pre-state configs and some scaling setting improvements. We've got some better support for Azure AD DS coming in as well. We're doing more around sort of DR, so we're doing active host pool DR against multiple regions, and also we're making the Nerdio application sort of highly available natively. So that's going to be pretty cool. And to keep Kirk happy, we just improved the NetApp files auto scaling, which we've recently released, and I'll go back to the next slide. And we've got something pretty big coming up, something which I can't really say. We're going to announce that as part of Microsoft Aspire, which is obviously coming up on July the 14th. I think we're making our announcement on July the 15th. So something really, really cool coming up, which I'm really excited about, but my mouth is zipped for now. Yeah, so I mean, this is the new auto scaling stuff which we've got for the NetApp files, which is really cool. So essentially what it enables you to do, it basically auto scales the capacity pools based on usage and also IOPS. Okay, so if it discovers latency, it will automatically scale it up to the next tier to get you the required IOPS that you need. And also it's the same for storage. So if you Sorry, my macro just went on mute for some strange reason. Anyway, it auto scales up to the capacitor port to give you a bit more performance, and also the size of it as well. So if you run out of space, you can put your sort of quotas in there, tell you the maximum and minimum you want to go to, and then it'll just go away and automatically manage that for you. So no one else is doing this. We're the only ones doing that. So really, really cool feature, and we do the same for Azure files as well. So a lot more features like that to come. Are you happy with that, Kate? Does that make you happy?
I think that's really cool.
Thank you. Okay, on to the next one. Bam, bam, bam. Oh, wrong one. Another really cool thing which I found recently, if anyone's on Clubhouse, there's a Clubhouse chat for Azure Virtual Desktop, which is going on right now. So really, really interesting format. At first I was like, oh, this is one of the gimmicks, but I went on there. It's actually really, really good. Because people really can't see each other, it's kind of to speak out a bit more, if you know what I mean. So it's actually really, really interactive. So some really clever people on there. So if you bored at 6 p.m. every Thursday, search for it. Some really good conversations. So something interesting to get your teeth into. The next update is the metadata. Microsoft have been doing some really good stuff with the metadata stuff recently. They've been doing a lot of public previews, but most of those have now gone GA. So we've now got GA in North Europe, West Europe, Canada Central, Canada East, UK South, and UK West. So this is particularly important to those environments, obviously, where sort of your data or data sovereignty, where it sits, is quite important for you. If you need sort of any sort of financial notifications or anything like that, you can now have your data closer to your sort of metadata service, closer to your regions where you're hosting all your stuff in as well. So I think it also, I mean, Microsoft don't say it, but it also helps with redundancy, because obviously less single points of failure going in there. You probably won't see any performance improvements because it's just metadata, but certainly for sort of data compliance, and it's a lot better to have all this extra, and I'm sure there's more to come as well. So it's that. And also the big news as well is SSO is now available if you're using ADFS. This has caused quite a bit of stir. I found it really interesting because people have been shouting for SSO for Azure Virtual Desktop for quite a while now. It comes and all they do is moaning. So I know why. Essentially, everybody's been trying to get rid of ADFS for the past 5 years or so. And Microsoft now released this, basically said, yeah, we now support ADFS. So I think the official line really should be, well, not the official, the unofficial line really should be, if you've got Azure Virtual Desktop in your environment and you've already got ADFS, it's an easy win to turn it on and use it, because it just enables it just saves the problem of double logging, which, to be honest with you, I've never had a problem with. People these days are so used to putting in multiple passwords and stuff like that. An extra log on a password or two doesn't really cause me any pain. I've not really had that many customers complain about it. They just get used to it. But now, if you've got ADFS in your environment and you want to use sort of a single sign-on or using ADFS, then take a look at this. If not, then I suggest you wait a while, because coming around the corner is Azure AD integration, and that will completely take away the requirement for Active Directory, and that will enable you SSO as well, because then your host pools are going to be signed into Azure AD as well as your users, which gives you single access to those resources. So that's coming, I think, in Q3 or Q4 this year into public preview. So keep an eye on that. So don't go deploying ADFS if you don't need to, essentially, because you'll regret it about 3 months time. The next one is Azure Image Builder. That's now GA. It's been in sort of public preview for quite a while now. So if you're unaware, Azure Image Builder is a service within Azure which enables you to do what it says. It builds your images for you. So you can integrate it with DevOps pipelines or just kick it off with scripts. It's actually Packer based. So if you know Packer, you'll get used to it quite easily. But yeah, it enables you to sort of control your image management quite easily. Just out of interest, is anyone using that in their environment? Yeah. One person. Okay. Because I know when it first came out, it was a bit flaky. Sort of you hit PowerShell commands, it went off, and you didn't know what was going on in the background. But I think now they've integrated more into the portal and stuff, so hopefully we'll see a lot more uptake of it. Okay, so on to the next one. Yeah, we get the usual Azure Virtual Desktop Client, so they seem to be updating that like twice a month at the moment. So nothing exciting in there apart from the name rechange and obviously a few more fixed stuff in there. So the only thing I will say, I mean, this one doesn't have stuff, but I think the one previous to that had quite a lot of fixes for Teams in it. So if you're not updating your clients, you should be, because you'll get a lot of benefits from them if you're using Microsoft Teams as well. But as per usual, always update to the latest version if you possibly can do. And the next handy tip which I found is the as part of the rename, they've obviously renamed it the user voice as well. This is a really good resource where you can, if you've got an idea to improve the service, then you can submit it in there, and then Microsoft will take a look at it. And the way that Microsoft works is they look at what people want. They develop the service based on user feedback. So if you want a feature, then launch it in user voice and get people to vote for it. And basically Microsoft Engineering, they just look at the top of those and they'll pick those and they will go and develop those. So really good resource. So I highly suggest you take a look at that if you've got a feature that you've always wanted in Azure Virtual Desktop. Also, another thing as well is the Quick Start. So Microsoft released that recently. So what this basically does, it builds an environment from nothing. So it gives you a complete environment. So it goes away and it'll create all the VNets for you. It'll create all the resource groups for you. It'll deal with your images for you. It'll go and create all your hosts for you. So really, really great resource. I mean, the only thing I will say is it obviously because it's a pre-built template, it's quite limited. You can input stuff, but there's certain stuff that you can't change in it. So, but no, if you want to build a really simple environment really quickly, or you're struggling to know how to get started, then definitely go and take a look at that. It also deploys in Azure AVD instances for you as well. So that's pretty cool. So take a look at that if you want to go from zero to hero in a very short space of time. And also the big news is the AZ-140 exam is now available. This has been in beta for a few months now. So I took it in beta as well. So very glad to have passed it. I saw a lot of people passed it as well. Really good exam, really enjoyable. So if you want to sign up for that, just Google it and you can take it. And it's probably, I'd say, really good depth of information compared to other Microsoft exams that I've taken. So really sort of relevant information. You know, you take some exams and they're like, why is this even question even there if it's got nothing to do with the subject? So I found the questions pretty cool. And that's it for the news. So has anyone got any questions, any opinions they want to talk about before we head off into doing our first presentation? Nope. Okay. Des, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Neil. Nathan, have you got control there to bring up the slides?
Not yet.
You should just, everyone's got control, so you should just be able to share content. Yeah. User, yeah, okay. Did you manage to do it? Yeah, that's it.
Cool, excellent. Okay, thanks Neil. So hi everyone, my name is Des McGuire. I'm the founder and Azure Solution Director at Servant. We are an expert Azure partner. Although we're based in Glasgow, we work all over Europe with some of Microsoft's largest enterprise customers. Thanks Neil and Kirk for the opportunity. With me tonight are some of the team who've been involved in this fantastic project for one of our good customers, University of Glasgow. We're happy to say we actually have the head of end user compute with us tonight as well. So you'll hear from the customer. And this session is a customer success session. It's not teaching you AVD in any detail, but I think it will give you a really good overview on our expertise, how we do AVD at scale, and I think more importantly, some of the successes that we had, and really get some first world feedback from the customer as well. So Nathan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi guys, my name is Nathan Bird. I'm a cloud architect at Azure. An Azure cloud architect at Servant, should I say. I've attended these communities events quite a lot, so thanks a lot, Neil, for having us tonight. My background, I've worn many hats. I was a system center admin for many years, so I know all about client operating systems, MDMs latterly, app packaging, etc. I've also been a Citrix admin for a number of years. But latterly, for the last 6-7 years, my focus has been on all things Azure and Microsoft 365. And in the last couple of years, or since the end of 2018, Azure Virtual Desktop. And I share the same frustrations as Neil about getting beta results for AZ140. So yeah, that's my background.
Okay, thanks Nathan. Andy, so we've got Andy, our Azure project manager, who was the PM on this project. Andy is around somewhere. Andy?
I am here. Yes, I am here. I haven't got my video feed on because I've had to hide away from all the kids and everyone's come home. I wouldn't get any peace and quiet otherwise. So yeah, I'm an Azure project manager working for Servant and spent a good deal of time with the University of Glasgow over the past few months. We did some work with them on Azure Foundation, and then we moved into helping them set up their AVD, and that's what we'll be talking about this evening.
Thanks, Andy. And last but not least, Pete Mitchell.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pete Mitchell, and I lead end user computing at Glasgow for staff and students, and I think I've been doing that for what feels like ever. And I'm delighted to be here and look forward to discussing the project.
Thanks, Pete. Next slide, Nathan. So before we get into this, guys, I'll tell you a little bit about Servant and our background. So me personally, I've been working with Azure for about 11 years. So I was involved in Project Red Dog, so I've been there from the very, very beginning. But you know, from a Servant perspective, we're one of the top UK Azure partners, and that's based on the projects we have, the laser focus we have, and more importantly, our approach, and that's called Journey to a Modern Enterprise. And I've got a slide on that in a second, but really, we have got a very structured approach in how we take customers on to Azure. And our view is if it runs in Azure, we'll help the customer migrate it. A part of our core business is data center migration. And what we really do is we enter the data center for the customer. And I'll cover some of those topical workloads that we do as part of that. Next slide, Nathan. So here we have our Journey to a Modern Enterprise, and this is a left to right approach that we have. Typically that starts off with a cloud assessment to gain insight into that environment and really help us build what that migration looks like for a customer. So we built some tools and solutions that help us take the customer data out of that assessment and really push that on to the next level in terms of creating standard plans, dependency visualizations, etc. And as Andy mentioned earlier, part of the early engagement we had with the university was to do what we call Azure Foundation. In Microsoft terminology, that's enterprise scale landing zones. And we typically come in, whether it's a greenfield or brownfield deployment, and we'll evolve or deploy that enterprise scale landing zone from the get-go. Our data path offering is our data platform offering. So that's where we help move customers to a modern data platform. Azure Pathway is our complete data center exit approach, and there's a full slide on that. All of these offerings are available on the Azure Marketplace if you want to find out more information about them. And then we break into two different areas. So modern apps, which comprises of app modernization, cloud native app development, Azure DevOps, both as a product and also as an ecosystem within the customers. And then more importantly, advanced workloads. So we do a lot of SAP in Azure, Oracle on Azure, VDI, which is underpinned by AVD, whether that's a Horizon Citrix management plane, we can help customers move, and we're doing a lot of AVD at scale for tens of thousands of users. So we built up a lot of expertise, and more importantly, a lot of internal IP that Nathan will touch on briefly as part of his talk. The other thing we do is we migrate legacy workloads, so mid-range, AIX, Solaris, mainframe, there's capabilities now and expertise that we have where we can help customers migrate that into Azure. So when we see data center exit, we really mean data center exit. Next slide, Nathan. So, and as I mentioned, Dale, I think the key thing here is just to set out the stall of what this session is, and it is a customer success session. You know, that's one of the reasons why we've got Pete here, so that you can hear it not just from us as a Microsoft partner, but from the customer in terms of their experience, both with the technology, with us as well. And I think really what the future is for AVD is a key platform for the university. So what we want to cover is we're not going to touch AVD in detail. You know, everybody on this call will have good experience, hands-on experience with AVD. We won't unfortunately be doing any online demos because there's a lot of our internal IP that we would be showing there. We want to keep that hidden. That's some of the crown jewels that we've created over the last 2 or 3 years. And we won't get into any detail in terms of engineering, but Nathan will touch on some of the stuff that we do to make AVD a more complete solution and really try and fill the gaps with some of the third-party solutions such as Citrix or VMware from a management plane. What we will discuss is our AVD approach with customers, the value add and expertise that we have with AVD, the overall project approach with the University of Glasgow, what the successes were like, what the challenges were, how we delivered the project, and then more importantly for the university, what's the next steps to really scale that up to the end state, which will be 78,000 users. So that's what we're going to speak about coming up. And over to you, Nathan.
All right, guys, I'll fire into this. So as with all of our customers, I ask them when we start to engage with them, especially on an Azure Virtual Desktop journey, 4 main questions plus other things. But first of all, I want to know what the problem is, or we want to know what the problem is that you're trying to solve, because ultimately you need to measure that, how you fix that problem. And a lot of the time, especially in the Azure Virtual Desktop world, you can detract from that deliverable because of use cases and things coming in left field. So what was the problem in the University of Glasgow's case? Problem was COVID hit and they had no way of delivering teaching to their students ultimately. Pete, do you want to give a bit more background into that?
Sure, yes. So they, like most institutions, the social distancing regulations in Scotland meant that the vast majority of our existing physical estate, which numbers about 4,000 workstations, were essentially rendered useless. So we're still enrolling students, and we're looking for a solution that enabled us to deliver as much of that physical environment to the students' own devices and to their now remote locations. So we support something like 800 applications to those physical desktops. So we didn't have much time, and the requirement was render enough of our teaching estate and our computer-based learning estate in a way that our students can access from their own devices as quickly as you possibly could. So that was the initial remit that we spoke to Servent about.
Thanks. On the back of that, I was like, you know, AVD might work for you here, but are you willing to learn fast? And the good news that came back from Pete was he had no other choice, basically. So they were all up here and they wanted it collectively as a team to work. So they were willing to learn as fast as they can around not only the virtual desktop capabilities, but Azure in general. Like a lot of customers on an Azure Virtual Desktop journey, it usually falls with the end user compute team who have never looked at Azure in general, and then they're starting to stick a VDI platform on top of it. And as you can appreciate, that's going to get messy quite quick. So forming that relationship and learning quickly, and briefing the internal staff at the university's end was key to this. So long story short, that answer is yes, and thankfully that pace was kept throughout this project, and still is excelling at pace. Now, test plans, sometimes that gets overlooked. A lot of the time it gets overlooked. People just goes, we've got it working now, let's get on with it. Fair enough. You to a tight time frame, your budgets, you're not hitting it, or you're nowhere near hitting it. So things just go away and escalate. So it's key really in an Azure Virtual Desktop world that you know what your users can access, in some way what they're trying to do, so you can measure and get structured feedback from them. Because I'm going to talk about it in a later slide, but in the grand scheme of things, Azure Virtual Desktop is 3 resources. The rest of the underlying infrastructure of Azure Virtual Desktop is a heap of other Azure components. So 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be Azure Virtual Desktop. That's the problem that they're feeding back. And it's being able to quickly identify where that problem's coming from. So what Pete did there was he had a test plan. We weren't too privy to that test plan. We don't understand the business as much as Pete does, but we understand the Azure end. And we fed into that test plan from an Azure technical capability. And the owners for each of those test cases and feedback were highlighted from day one. Bottom right, are you licensed? Now, if you, I always ask because people think they are, and if you follow the Microsoft marketing train, they'll have you believe everybody in the world can just start consuming Azure Virtual Desktop, and they're licensed to run Windows 10 multi-session from day one. Not always the case, and in the education space, vastly different to your Gen Pop enterprise. So, yeah, this is what we try and enforce from day one. Don't just assume. Pete managed to work his way through the myriad of education licenses and versus enterprise licenses and get that right mix for the University of Glasgow. So after we've done all of that and we've agreed and we've got a basis of what we're trying to do, hopefully this moves on. Yeah. I introduced them to sometimes what we call the Azure Virtual Desktop, or at the time we were doing this in anger, the Windows Virtual Desktop ride. And stepping onto that AVD bus. So a bit of humour here, but hopefully you might not find it funny. We'll see. We don't stick to the speed limit. So Azure Virtual Desktop, we're Azure people at Servant. That's all we do. That's our business. We're Azure experts. Well, we call ourselves Azure experts, but we can back that up. I'm personally a big fan of Azure Virtual Desktop. I understand VMware Horizon. I've looked at environments for at enterprise scale. I understand Citrix. And what I try to get across is don't compare apples to apples. And part of our job is to be honest about the technology and understand there will be pitfalls. So we don't stick to the speed limit. We don't take the path of least resistance. So if you read the Microsoft documentation, and you'll know yourself as Azure Virtual Desktop people, path of least resistance every time. Labs, demos, yeah, they're easy. Anybody can do that in 5-10 minutes. But let's think about enterprise scale. There'll be bumps in the road. So going back to that question around, are you willing to learn quickly? The answer's got to be yes, or you might as well just forget it and go and spend money with another vendor. That's my ultimate blunt admission there. Now, obviously, we'll talk about third-party management tools, and they have their place. They definitely do. But without having not a vast understanding, but you must have an appreciation in the background of things like well, you definitely need a virtualization experience. You need to know a lot of Azure. Device management, networking, and Active Directory is important. These are all peripheral items for Azure Virtual Desktop, and without getting them right, Azure Virtual Desktop just does not work, especially at the scale of the numbers that Pete was looking to get on board. So we introduced that. He still didn't get off that bus, so we ploughed forward, and we introduced him to the driver of that bus. And I always say these 4 things. Remember, nothing works without a network. So there's no point starting with these AVD ventures if you don't involve your network team. You've got to have hybrid network capability at the minute. And when we were doing this, so get them involved from day one. Nothing works without an identity. Again, same thing. You're reliant on an old school Active Directory in some capability. Thinking about, look at all the woolly marketing material here from Microsoft. It's ultimately Windows on a virtual machine with a couple of MSIs on top of it. That's all it is. Nothing more complex than that. But it's the supporting and getting that architecture right is where you need to spend the time. And if it's broken, like I said previously, it's not going to be Azure Virtual Desktop. It's probably not going to be the VMs in Azure. It's probably going to be a GPO, a missing firewall rule, or DNS, or Microsoft have took Azure AD down. But we won't stick too much on that. So the facts, Azure Virtual Desktop. Bring my notes up. The facts, you ultimately need to know the Azure platform. Azure Virtual Desktop is not a polished and packaged enterprise VDA solution out of the box. It can be, and it is here now by getting that appreciation of all of the things, the bells and whistles that hang off the back of it, and bringing those people that know that part of the business or environment at your organization together to drive it forward. As I've said previously, you will need to invest time in engineering effort. A, to make it easier for yourself, and B, well, yeah, understanding automation capabilities. Third-party tools. Neil works for Nerdio. I think Nerdio is a great tool. There's probably Citrix people on here. They're probably pricing themselves out of some of this. But there's absolutely a place for third-party management tools. Now, this particular project up to now is all native. So it's using native Azure capabilities. When we first started rolling out or deploying the university's Azure landing zone, we were working with the infrastructure guys over there, and they were saying, we want to use third-party MVAs from our chosen security vendor. Absolutely fine, no problems with that. It's on you to go and work out how that's going to work in your environment, how you plumb them in, how you manage them, and we'll help you forward Azure traffic and things to them. No problem at all. But then this hit. So the decision was, guys, it's in your capable hands. Use as much cloud native or Azure native capabilities as you can. So we used Azure Firewall before Premium came out to ease some of those security concerns. Just to remove one of those potential blockers that we could have had here with a third-party vendor. This is not going to say it's not going to change in future, but this is what we did for this particular project up to now. Tell the users at the University of Glasgow, you know what Azure is. It's more than an Azure portal. Don't rely on the Azure portal for Azure Virtual Desktop to get what you want out of it. You're going to have to start thinking outside the box with some of these things. You're going to have to write scripts to do things. As I say, willing to learn new skills. Stay close to product roadmaps. So we're all members of the community here. We follow people on Twitter. It's a wealth of knowledge. I work for an Azure partner, but Neil mentioned it earlier. We as partners we don't know what Microsoft are coming up with. They don't tell us. We are under NDA, but it's important that if you're managing it in your organization, stay close to your product roadmaps, and also touch on it at the end, build your own. 90% of the changes you make to an Azure Virtual Desktop environment are going to be on the engineering effort, so they're not customer facing. It's important that that roadmap is built internally and owned. So Pete has done that. Pete owns that roadmap, and we can cover some future state stuff later on. This one's big. Understand your applications and their dependencies. We've got multiple customers that go, Azure Virtual Desktop's brilliant. We can do remote working. We've not got push apps to hundreds of laptops, whatever. And we're like, yeah, but how robust and how much knowledge do you have of your apps? Do you know how to install them first off? Do you have the installation media, or did the guy who did it for you leave years ago and nobody knows? So in Pete's case, at the University of Glasgow, they had 800 apps. I was like, whittle that down. Otherwise, this is going nowhere fast. So I think we got it down to, I can't remember the exact number of apps, but it was a lot lower than 800. And we got that into 16 images. So across different teaching capabilities at the university or schools, they have different app sets. So we decided the quickest way of doing this is give me an image for each of these schools. We'll create a host pool for each of those pools. Now, if there's back-end infrastructure for these front ends, make no bones about it, the application performance might be poor if that back end is not next to the Azure Virtual Desktop VM. And in some cases, depending on the feedback, you might have to move your apps, but don't be completely opposed to that. Don't know. Somebody else has took control. Don't know what's going on. Somebody else has took control. Last one on this slide, be prepared to fail. Somebody else has took control. Be prepared to fail. So we laid this out. You're not going to succeed first time with everything you want to do. You're going to have to learn fast, fix forward, test and test again. We don't live in a utopian world, and that's never truer than the case with Azure Virtual Desktop. Next, probably covered a bit of this, but university background is probably over to Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Yeah, a few words on it. Yeah, you're right. You've covered off a bit of this, and Pete was laying out the reasons as well. But there's a few extra things to say here. As I think is that the university did have and do have a heritage virtual desktop offering, which is on premises, but the cost and also the timescales of being able to scale that up wouldn't have been viable. There's no way that procurement would have gone through in time, especially in the pandemic world when getting hold of hardware is much easier. Much more difficult rather than it has been in the past. There were also some other drivers that were reasons for picking AVD, not least of which, as we all know, is that it is and remains the only platform where we can get true multi-session Windows 10. Without it having to offer a personal desktop if you want to do a true desktop experience. Security was key as well. Obviously, that's built into the rest of the Azure stack and the Microsoft 365 offerings that the university was had already procured and were deploying. And we wanted to be able to scale this very quickly. So we did the initial test with a few hundred users, and then go out college by college to get the numbers up into the thousands. To the next slide, please, Nathan. Thank you. So what we're able to achieve in a fairly short time was the key driver is delivering that remote teaching, that remote learning. And of all the AVD sessions that were attempted, 100% of them were met, and remote teaching was delivered using this platform. and we got that up and running for a couple of thousand users very quickly. Now, it's worth saying, as Nathan's already alluded to, that would not have been possible with all customers. It was only because Pete and his team have a very tight hold and understanding of what their customer base is. I mean, they'd have to really, you got 4,000 plus physical pieces of kit that they manage, 800 applications and tens of thousands of end users. So they would need to understand what those builds would look like and what the user experience was going to be like. And most importantly as well, their operation is not as siloed as we see with some of our other clients, where you might have to ask for something from the networking team and then you just wait and wait and wait. So we're able to get everybody around the table, have regular meetings throughout the week and push this thing through because we had a common vision and we knew exactly where we were going. And that really helped with the adoption acceleration as well. It's something that Pete was talking to us about earlier when we were prepping for this, is although it's the end users are used to using Windows 10 and they're used to using the applications that are delivered over AVD, there's still a bit of reticence and a bit of fear about using this in the cloud and this new experience. But just a couple of one-to-one sessions with some key users, typically the teaching staff, takes that fear away in a matter of moments, and then they're able to sell that out throughout the rest of the colleges. It was also key for them to be able to keep an eye on the costs and be able to see where that's going. So we've implemented tagging, enforced tagging, so we can see where that money spend is being going out through, and we involved the finance team at the uni as well, so they're getting the alerts as stuff comes through, so they know where that money's being spent, and they can tie it back into individual college spend. Monitoring as well, need to know where things might be going awry, where they might need to scale up and so on, and anything else that that you would plug into monitoring, alerting, and that feeds back into the central alerting tool set that the university has as well. And the final thing to say on this really is that as more of the colleges come on and the confidence in the platform grew, that took off very quickly, and additional use cases are coming through, not just for AVD, but for other aspects of Azure. So, well, if this was this, I hazard to say straightforward, if it was as straightforward as to get AVD up and running, well, what can we do about problem X or problem Y? So it's spinning up other opportunities as well there. And I know that we'll probably talk about at the end about some opportunities perhaps for AVD in some of the Far East colleges that the university deliver services into. Thanks, Nathan. Back to you.
Just on that, Andy. So Pete, probably a good time to bring you into this, just to add anything further to some of those points, particularly around the achievements.
Yeah. So we've been delighted with it as a platform. It's one of those times where you have a problem and a solution lands that has the attributes that it matches what your problem is. You know, we had an indeterminate teaching load. We didn't know what the uptake would be. So the OPEX nature of Azure, we really understand our workload and what to do, but again, we're novices in Azure. So it was great that Servent came on board and provided that bit of expertise. The main lesson for other people, I think, from our experience is that we very quickly solved the technical challenges. It's a really good product, it's a solid product, you know, a very wide range of applications running in it, and it's running them reliably for us, and it's sort of doing what it said it would do in the tin. So that's been a good experience, but familiarising our staff with teaching in whole remote environments, the students are comfortable working remotely more than the staff. We have to remember that one of the customers is the staff who delivers the teaching, and as we move away from our more technical subjects like computing science and STEM, some of our teaching staff are less engaged with that. So a big bit of learning for me is that I have to make that on-ramp for them a much simpler thing. Certainly once appraised that way, they seem to like the platform. In terms of Glasgow's strategic use, we're definitely going to expand it. We think we're going to reduce the amount of physical workstations that we have, returning that space to an agile space so that people can use their own devices. And we have a very strategic place for Windows Virtual Desktop in our staff arena. We're just launching our staff service just now, and we're up about 250 users a day, and we'll be up about 500 soon. So our strategic course of direction is to to move to an agile first platform for staff and do a lot of our line of business apps and anything more demanding or with a higher security requirement inside Windows Virtual Desktop. So very confident in the platform. Really pleased with what we've got back so far, and can see us expanding its usage and using it to solve other problems we have in other areas.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for that.
There's a slide here on a little bit of tech and a little bit of the softer side on how we achieve what we did here. So it's not all about tech, as Pete said. You know, anybody can manipulate technology. Sometimes it's about you know, driving towards that same goal, as I mentioned earlier. First thing we did though really was, guys, everything needs to be managed as code here, so everything as feasibly possible. Disclaimer, due to the amount of of apps that the guys that we're expected to manage here. But in terms of Azure resource deployments, Azure Virtual Desktop resource deployments, all of that's done by ARM templates because Bicep didn't exist at the time. So basically, with other, you know, clients and with the particular one, if you reverse engineer the ARM templates that deploy, you know, Azure Virtual Desktop resources via the portal, you know, and scrape it right the way back, it's a virtual machine with 2 MSIs on it, which you target to a host pool key. So it's easy to manipulate those. And with the introduction of Azure DevOps, what the lesson there is more than a developer can use Azure DevOps. So they started using it. We started using it for code repositories and knowledge sharing, and then we've introduced all manner of other stuff. We're looking at pipelines at the minute to automate some of this stuff. But the main one being code repositories and sharing. And I've stuck on this ARM template problem. Here's the files via email, and I was like, no, just upload it, or, you know, sync it to the repo and we'll have a look and then we'll fix it together, that type of effort. And what that meant was, once we got those templates right for this customer, they were easy to rinse and repeat. Parameter file, same ARM template, 16 host pools within a matter of minutes with just different names. Now, Pete touched on it. These were totally new to Azure. And when you start looking at the number of VMs and stuff that we potentially need to scale up to in this environment, these guys were easily going to hit the subscription limits in Azure. Now, plug for Kirk here. So the FS Logix profile shares are on NetApp files, just to get that throughput and flexibility on tiers and things when we needed to. And it's just a lot easier than premium Azure files, in my opinion, to administer. So they were new to that. They were new to Azure in general. And as we all know, if you've got Azure NetApp files connected to a virtual network in Azure, you're limited to 1,000 used IPs. So there's absolutely no point in having an address space bigger than that when Azure files is at play. Azure NetApp files is at play. So we immediately said, listen, you're going to have to spin up spoke subscriptions off your platform subscription. Now, there's a lot of things you need to do to get that right, with peering and making sure route tables are in place to go through the Azure firewall, which was, I think there's a question on controlling egress. It's Azure Firewall. Standard at the time, premium wasn't there. The network guys are on board with the private preview of premium firewall, so that ticked a few of the boxes halfway through this project. So what we did and what we engineered for them was an Azure blueprint to spin up spoke subscriptions when they need to. I think that's been used twice now. So that blueprint, and I'd love my engineer Reese to be on the call, but unfortunately he's on holiday today. He'll perhaps do a session on what we did around those blueprints for Neil at a later date. But he put some hours into that, and basically it allowed John at Pete's end to basically ultimately deploy a subscription with everything he needed in it to prepare to host virtual desktop resources. Additional resources use Azure Firewall, as I said, and NetApp files. Now, we've done focus sessions on FS Logics. It's a big bugbear of mine because it's a massive area of Azure Virtual Desktop in most cases, unless you're using personal desktops without it. And it's important that you not only get the storage right it's hosted on, is the maintenance of those FS Logics profiles. And sometimes it's forgotten, and most of the time it's forgotten about the amount of effort you need to put in to maintain them and clear white space. And, you know, Jim Moyle, the god of FS Logics, as I like to call him, thankfully wrote something to do that. And without that, we'd be in a world of pain as Azure Virtual Desktop administrators. So that was cleared up with the guys. They run that on a schedule now from Azure VMs. They keep their profile storage down. I think we're up to might be 8 terabytes of NetApp's file storage. I need to check. I haven't checked the dates, the stats there. But what that opened the infrastructure guys up to was, well, I was going to go and buy Santin. Do I really need to go and buy Santin now we've got Azure NetApp files? I'm like, you might do, but at least you've got something you can quickly test and then delete it if it's not going to work for you. Azure Firewall. So the use case for the uni was a bit different because every customer I ask goes, we've got to filter egress traffic. We've got to do web filtering. We've got to do this, that, and the other. And I was like, well, fair enough. You need an NVA in Azure. Don't hairpin that back across your hybrid connection because you're just going to be in a world of pain. And people on desktops, not so much remote apps, but desktops, they just go on, send emails normally and surf the internet. But for the University of Glasgow, the way they do it on premise at the minute is they write all of the proxy streams out through a tap. But you can't really do that in Azure. So what we did was we hooked up Azure Firewall to Sentinel. And the security guys have got a stream of the diagnostics and the application rules being hit in that firewall. And that was enough for them to see what people were doing on the Azure Firewall. Now, obviously, with Azure Firewall Premium, that's easy because you can do web categories now and open up what you want and what you don't want. Before, the guys were looking at an MVA product to do that, and long story short, they weren't getting very far with the vendor of choice. So it's Azure Firewall at the minute, but they might choose to change that in the future. Now, golden image templates. Now, I've talked about it earlier. Image management's like 75% of Azure Virtual Desktop. So ultimately, Windows 10 multi-session, which was the chosen OS, obviously, you can only get that from the marketplace unless you reverse engineer the media, which isn't supported. I wouldn't encourage you to do that. So due to the amount of apps, the decision was taken, we're going to deploy an Azure VM. I said, I can show you, deploying all your apps silently via a PowerShell script, deploy it via a custom script extension. That's easy. I'll talk about Azure Image Builder later. I was one of the thumbs up as to who's using it in production. But it was clearly too complex. So what we did was built the VMs in Azure. We domain joined them. We stuck an SCCM agent on them, and Pete's SCCM guys went and handled the application installs for us. They'd already got them packaged up. We made sure that these VMs could talk on a subnet in Azure, could talk to the SCCM infrastructure, and they deployed those apps for us. And I think it took them about a week or so to get those 16 images deployed or these VMs up to scratch for us. We backed those VMs up, so we had a point in time recovery. Somebody keeps taking control. Somebody keeps taking control.
Yeah, it's whoever Norman L is. You seem to be taking control of the slides, unfortunately.
Yeah, anyway, I'll keep taking it back. Tug of war. Yeah, so I detailed, again, ARM templates, deploy a VM with a custom script extension. Again, that's only as powerful as the guy writing the script that the custom script extension runs. But thankfully, I've got a good grip of that, and I understand PowerShell and app packaging and things like that. So that's what it could have done, but it just worked for this customer. Hand it over to the SCCM guys, get it up to scratch, patch it, sysprep, and create that image into the shared image gallery, because I think we need something like, I think we're up to about 15 replicas due to the amount of VMs that we're getting deployed. I need to check the figures again. I probably should have had them. So that's what we did, and they've always got a reference to go back to, that VM. They just power it up, they patch it, sysprep, and it works for this customer at the moment. Now, Pete's working on a roadmap. We'll cover it in the next slide around clearing some of this legacy application technical debt, as we like to call it in the IT world nowadays. So yeah, we can introduce things like Azure Image Builder and streamline that image capture process. And Windows 11, why not? We'll hit that with it. ARM templates for Azure Virtual Desktop resources. As I say, if you follow the guidance from Microsoft and you're an Azure administrator and you're totally using the native capabilities, which we are here, you deploy the resources, you add VMs to it. You've then got to go and deploy a couple of PowerShell scripts according to Microsoft to create logic apps and scale these host pools. So I just reversed engineered those and wrote them into one linked ARM template. So these guys can deploy a new workspace and or host pool with all the scaling capabilities from the ARM template in one go. The guys at the moment are choosing to manually deploy those as they need to. So new Azure deployments via PowerShell, but they are starting to look at pipelines, as I said. So we've done some work with other customers around automating and adding VMs to host pools via Azure DevOps pipelines. And then the good news there is Microsoft start to use GitHub and GitHub Actions, so we might need to relook at that. Bit of the technical stuff there. So scaling up, we all know, the limitations around the native scaling capability that Microsoft have currently got against Azure Virtual Desktop. But in Pete's case, he was willing to suck up that cost. The budget was there. So 25% of the estate is reserved instance, basically meaning that 25% of the estate are on all the time. So obviously new things have come down the roadmap from Azure Virtual Desktop and start on Connect VMs and all of that stuff. So we're going to start to look at introducing that to them, but we had to get over the point that wasn't there. Another part of that ARM template was to deploy to availability zones in Azure before Microsoft decided to amend their ARM templates to do that. We did that. So lost my train of thought there. Yeah, ARM templates for everything, deploy them quickly, and move on with your life, basically. So out with all of the technical hurdles that you usually have to overcome with Azure. How did Pete and his team help us with this? Because without this, it would have failed. So Pete clearly communicated the goal here to his team and all support teams at University of Glasgow. They all pulled in the right direction. So if we went to the networking team saying, listen, we're going to make this network change to your firewall, or can you make this networking change to the firewall? It was turned around within a matter of minutes, if not hours, because it was in code. Obviously, other people have got other jobs to do. So this project seemed to get to the top of that tree for the period we were working on it in the tight timeframes with COVID kicking off. The will to adapt and learn was key. Now, I'm an Azure professional and I'm an AVD professional. You can very quickly get disheartened with it because you might feel that there's a basic feature that you should be able to do in the portal. I'll drop it down to 8. 8 times out of 10, it's not there. So you're going to have to think outside the box on how you do that. So automate the mundane. These guys just took it with 2 hands and started writing PowerShell scripts and all sorts to make their lives easier. They're perhaps going to look at Nerdio in the future. That's not, I'll let Pete take that up with Neil. The next orange box there is ownership. So Pete clearly defined an owner for each problem that was coming back to us. Now, that owner was shook basically until that problem had gone away or we'd found a workaround. Pete, you might want to cover what problems you had. I'll let you do that in a minute. There wasn't too many on this project because the opinions were moved out of the way. The goal of the organization was constantly referred to. You know, it wasn't helping that somebody said, well, we can do it this other way with this other tech. It didn't matter. They wanted this to be a success. And we can have that conversation after COVID when people could start teaching again. And our knowledge and our understanding of Azure, not Azure Virtual Desktop, but Azure and DevOps and automation capabilities, I could solution their problem within, or one of my colleagues could solution their problem pretty much instantly because 9 times out of 10 we'd have come across it. I was trying to think of the issue that we had to raise with the product group. Come back to that. But we're hand in hand with the Azure Virtual Desktop and Microsoft product groups as a gold partner. So if there's something we can't answer, we went and got that answer from the product group. We moved on. Those decisions were made in an informed way and quickly. Back to the problems.
I think, Nathan, it might have been where we were having trouble getting some of the OneDrive stuff to sync.
That's right, it was OneDrive.
Yeah, that's it, OneDrive. Yeah. I knew there was something. I think that was ironed out within a day or so, perhaps a day and a half, by somebody that could read an XML file about 85 folders deep in the Windows operating system that I'd have never found. Fair play to the guy at Microsoft that found that. Can't remember his name. Yeah.
So Nathan, that's the 5-minute warning, Nathan.
Yeah, we've got one slide to finish. That's us. I was going to say, Pete, if there's any problems that we overcome on your side.
No, we didn't have that many technical issues. The point you made earlier about not assuming that your issues related to AVD is key. It's, you know, it's always GP. It's just a new image. You've made a mistake somewhere, just keep going. We had a parallel testing routine. SCCM let my team who weren't AVD capable test applications and sequences in the interoperation of environments on physical devices. So by the time we landed them in the virtual environment, we were pretty sure that linkage and that packaging to be done properly. So we sort of addressed that as an atomic unit, the whole application stack, all 50 or 60 or so. So it meant that by the time we landed, if we had an issue, we knew that issue was specific to the environment. And for the most part, early on, it was just opening up ports in the firewall, really, that hadn't been open to the Azure space yet. Not really very many technical issues with the platform at all.
Yep. Yeah. Good. Yeah, so this wasn't, in the grand scheme of things, how many users have you got on it now, Pete?
Well, we're open up. All of our staff and student now have access, and that's, like you say, into the 58,000 full-time and about 18,000 affiliate and part-time, depending on association, although we do have some licensing challenges for some of those 18,000 coming up at renewal. We're well, so I think we've got probably more than 8,000 people through in teaching in the first section. So I'm very much focused on the more STEM subjects, the subjects to engage with it early, and had started teaching. As you know, we had computing science, engineering, and other teaching in week 1. So we're getting wider and wider access, and we're thinking about doing part of an enrolment using the service next year, so that on day 2, students are aware that there is a service they can access from their own devices in the cloud and access any of the applications and environments they need to.
Mhm. Cool. Yeah, so the decision here, I think there's a few questions I've seen popping off, not read them properly, but we decided to pick bigger VMs with a higher user density rather than lots of smaller VMs. I think the smallest VM in this environment is a D32. Again, I probably should have put those in the slides, but yeah, Neil's asked for further technical sessions, and I'm more than happy to do that. So what's next for the University of Glasgow? Expanding that Azure DevOps capability, you know, getting the guys more in line with automation, you know, all of that stuff. Part of that's Azure Image Builder. So a piece of work I did with another customer was to automate their image build processes via Azure DevOps and Azure Image Builder. Now, Neil's right, that was hella clunky before GA, but now I think it's great. But again, it's only as powerful as the guy writing the script that Azure Image Builder runs. So you do have to invest some testing time into that. Improving the AVD service. So, you know, mentioned it earlier, staying close to that roadmap, building your own, and introducing those new capabilities in a structured manner to the service. Azure Sentinel, so the security guys have got a stream for Azure Sentinel. They also use Microsoft Cloud App Security, and they've got a wealth of knowledge. David, the security guy, is not here. He could probably do a session on that alone. Intune device management, so that's next as well for multi-session Windows 10. Pete touched on it, app modernization, getting rid of the legacy apps. And Pete, I'll let you touch on these last two and I'll shut up. But thanks, guys. Staff on AVD and AVD in China.
Yeah, so in AVD in China, the university has a number of relationships with institutions in China. I was at a meeting today, or had a Zoom today, with University of Electronic Science and Technology from Chengdu. We also have a number of students who take distance courses and through COVID have been domiciled in China. So we've been looking at how we improve access to our services. And we think we're coalescing around the conclusion that locating a Windows Virtual Desktop service within the Chinese firewall would be the best way to support our students' access to our Glasgow-based materials. So it looks like we're going to be taking that forward very shortly, and that's quite an exciting development. On the staff, at AVD, we're replacing our RDS service right now, end of life that July the 31st. And we're right now rolling out our new Intune-enabled mobile first desktop for staff, and that's going to see a transition to doing pretty much all of our line of business and highly secure stuff in AVD moving forward. So I'll keep it short, gents. That's me.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Nathan. Thanks, Andrew. And importantly, thanks, Neil, for the opportunity. I hope everybody found that useful. If you want anything further information on AVD at scale, hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'll have a conversation, and I'll hand it back to you, Neil, in the interest of time.
Cool. Guys, really awesome session. Really interesting. I love hearing about sessions like this because a lot of people say Azure Virtual Desktop can't scale, Azure Virtual Desktop can't operate at this capacity. Well, you guys have proved that it can. So kudos, and really interesting session. What I would love is a second sort of technical deep dive, because there's been a lot of technical questions which we don't really have time to go through, otherwise we'd be here all night. So I think what we'll do is, if you want to keep on and just respond to the questions in the chat window, and then happy to have a second sort of follow-up session with you guys, a bit more of a technical deep dive, and we can cover some of the subjects as well. Does that sound okay? But no, appreciate you guys putting the presentation together. To say probably one of the most interesting presentations I've ever seen personally. So really good job, really great story.
Final word for me: if you keep it simple, it will work.
Yeah, exactly.
It's added complexity and opinions. Move them out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think in future I'm going to limit the people who can take control, because whoever was taking control, why? Don't do that, please. Yeah. So
I think it's my Teams is defaulting the focus on the take ownership button. So I think if somebody's touching enter or hitting the mouse button, it probably be default.
Okay, cool. What's it? Well, as I said, if you want to respond to the questions in the chat window, also we can do a follow-up session as well. But yeah, great presentation, really interesting. So thanks, guys. Okay, so now we have another really interesting session. We've got Marius Sandbu, who's on to talk to us about sort of the security and monitoring Azure Virtual Desktop. So there's going to be some similar conversations and similar topics to what we've just seen as well. So that's pretty cool. So over to you, Marius.
Thank you, Neil. So just going to share my screen, so let me know when you can see it. Pops up on your window.
Yep, we can see it.
Yeah, great. So I'm just going to make sure that I have PowerPoint and I can see Teams at the same time. So if there are any questions throughout the session, just feel free to ask them. I'll try to answer as quick as I can. Now, as Neil said, I'm going to be talking about security monitoring AVD environment. This is mostly going to be from our own projects that I've been doing as a service provider. What kind of tools we build and how we integrate the different monitoring capabilities in Azure with our own monitoring tools, and how we tie everything together per se. Now, I just want to mention that if you have any follow-up questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to me on any social media platform where you can find me. The presentation itself has been uploaded to GitHub. I'll also be uploading any scripts and examples and visuals that I'll be showing as part of the presentation there as well. Because I will be showcasing some code examples that we use as part of the deployment, because much like the previous presentation, we are using GitHub, we're using Azure DevOps with pipelines, but we took an alternative route. So we're using Terraform for the deployment of everything that we do in AVD and Azure in general. We're also using HashiCorp Packer to image management, but we're also using Terraform to actually deploy monitoring and security capabilities as well. My name is Marius, as mentioned. I work as skill lead for a service provider out of the Nordics. I'm based out of Norway, called Every. I've been working with Azure for close to 11 years now. I've been working with AVD since the early days, but also been working a lot with Citrix and VMware, so pretty familiar with it in the end user computing space. So what I'm going to be talking about is, of course, looking into how we can stop these bad guys in hoodies to trying to get access to our Azure environment. And of course, as Nathan also mentioned, an Azure environment can be pretty complex. There's a lot of different components in place, and we need to understand what kind of capabilities, what kind of log sources that we need to look after, and also what kind of capabilities that we actually get to do to get information about these threats and monitor and have playbooks in place to automatically stop bad guys in the tracks. So of course, I want to start off by talking about the overall security ecosystem that Microsoft has as part of Microsoft 365 and Azure in general. Focus more on the monitoring capabilities, because log analytics and the logging tools and the different log sources that we have is a crucial part of building a good baseline for monitoring. Also want to focus on Sentinel and other security features that Microsoft has, specifically Defender, and overall security and governance mechanisms in Azure. Now, last thing is that, of course, a lot of these capabilities, there are, of course, different price tags on all of them. So before you start using these different security mechanisms, you need to have a basic understanding of what's this going to cost me if I enable like Azure Defender for all my session hosts in Azure, or what's it going to cost if I enable this specific monitoring tool in Azure, or monitoring rule in Azure, because there's a lot of small price tags on all different services. So it's, we have seen some bad examples there. Well, I'm not going to cover them as part of this session, however. Now, when it comes to the security ecosystem in Azure and Microsoft 365 in general, all of these play an important part on any AVD environment. First off, of course, we have the identity mechanisms that Microsoft has. We have Azure Active Directory, which is the base identity provider. We have identity protection, which is used to manage and protect against abnormal user authentication or user traffic. Can also be used to protect against leaked credentials. We have, of course, conditional access, which we use. I'll go cover that a little bit detail later, how we can block access from specific countries, or we can define specific conditions that need to apply before users actually allowed to get access into an AVD environment. Microsoft is also focusing heavily on information protection. So that means they can not just automatically classify data based upon specific tags, but they can also automatically encrypt data. So one of the new things that they introduced a couple of months ago is DLP encryption for Windows-based clients. That way that if someone is working on a specific sensitive document within virtual VDI desktop, they can automatically go in and encrypt the data based upon information that's inside the document. And of course, Microsoft is also extending this these type of DLP capabilities into more native Azure components as well. Now, also moving into the more infrastructure services. Of course, within Azure infrastructure, we have Azure Firewall as mentioned, there's Application Gateway, there's different encryption mechanisms that we can use. We have Azure Policy that allows us to define a governance baseline. And of course, we have all these different security mechanisms underneath which can create incidents. There's a lot of different portals you need to be aware of. Microsoft is now moving into consolidating this into more of the Microsoft 365 admin center. But all of these different security products can generate an alert. Now you can also collect all the data and log sources into Log Analytics, which is the centralized log aggregation service in Azure. And then you can have Azure Sentinel, which sits as a module on top of Log Analytics that can automatically generate incidents based upon predefined queries that we create. So it's kind of like the glue in all the different data sources that we have in Azure. And then we have the Graph Security API. So essentially, if there's an incident or an alert in any of the Microsoft security products, it will automatically create an incident in the Graph Security API. So it's important that you provide or build an integration from the Graph Security API into your monitoring tool or ITSM tool, or just get a notification if something's happening there. Now, from an automation perspective, I'm just going to go through this quickly, but when you're working in Azure, either from an automation, scripting, Terraform, Bicep, or using it for the portal, everything is going to go through the Azure Resource Manager layer, where you have different providers within Resource Manager, which is responsible for certain tasks. So you have a resource provider for the compute, which is responsible for building and creating the virtual machine. You have a resource provider for network, and for different components within Azure and so on. And then we also have the Graph API, which is responsible for everything that's inside Microsoft 365. So for instance, right now, Terraform or HashiCorp created a new provider for Azure Active Directory, which is using the new Microsoft MSI, I can't remember the name, but it uses the new authentication provider within Azure Active Directory. So that way we can also use Terraform to not just do everything within Azure, but also give us more functionality within the Graph API. Of course, when we're using automation, there's some tools that is not Terraform supported natively, doesn't have any integration with ARM, so we need to use PowerShell in most cases or use REST APIs. So I've just added these code snippets examples in terms of how you install different modules in place. And also now you can also install extensions directly from the CLI as well if you're using Visual Studio Code to do your code editing as well. Super quick introduction to Terraform. Now, the reason why we're using Terraform compared to using Azure Resource Manager templates natively is because one, some of our developers, me including, is allergic to JSON code. But the main purpose is that Terraform has of course support for other cloud providers, including our monitoring tools, and that way we can use the similar syntax to deploy everything within Azure or other cloud providers, but also third-party management tools that we use as well. So it makes things a little easier when we're using the same automation framework for multiple different platforms. But Terraform has a provider for Azure. So that way we can write configuration in Terraform syntax. It will automatically authenticate to Azure using a specific connection mechanism. It can either be using a service principal that we create, or we're using this as part of a DevOps pipeline where we have a virtual machine that is part of the Azure subscription and has a managed service identity, which can connect and authenticate directly to the subscription, and then do the provisioning or the configuration that we defined as part of the Terraform syntax. course, using the managed service identity or managed service identity is the main approach that we use for actually deploying resources within Azure subscriptions. In regards to building an Azure foundation, of course, as mentioned earlier in this other previous presentation, of course, many rely on using the enterprise scaffold deployment for Microsoft, which Microsoft has. But of course, we also see it has some limitations in terms of monitoring capabilities. So it gives us a foundation, but we need to expand upon that, giving or building with more monitoring tools or building monitoring modules or monitoring rules in place. But also following up on all the changes that is happening to the platform. So all of these components or these modules or building blocks, if you will, they're part of an ever-going, evolving automation framework that we have. But of course, when you're building stuff in Azure, of course, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. Of course, as mentioned, you have the subscription limits, you have the IP limitation for NetApp files, which we have encountered a lot of times because a lot of organizations that we're working on also deploying Kubernetes in Azure. So that means that if you're using Kubernetes in the same VNet or the peered VNet connection, then suddenly you reach the IP limit. Of course, from an AVD environment, there might be issues with the session host. There might be issues with the network, but I haven't seen any issues with the network inside of Azure because that's virtualized. But again, it's most likely between the end user and the service itself. Might be some errors with the underlying service that Microsoft is hosting or supporting services. Azure AD was mentioned previously, and I've seen that a couple of times. But of course, it also applies to other supporting services such as Azure Storage, which we've also seen a couple of times, or there might be errors with a specific region or availability zone. We have seen in a couple of projects where we had a big project that we need to deploy thousands of session hosts, and then we saw there was a limitation cap in a specific region. So we needed to wait six months until Microsoft got more capacity before we were able to actually deploy the new session hosts. And of course, there are some intermittent issues that we see with ARM not scaling, or we have throttling, or some specific other component that we see that is getting some certain issues, which we see from time to time. When it comes to log sources and log data, there's a lot of different log data that you need to be aware of. Not all log sources are enabled by default, and some of them are depending on what kind of license SKU you have. So for instance, everything within the Microsoft 365 security or Office 365 security, not enabled by default, can be enabled, but depending on what kind of SKU you have a 90-day period. But you can, of course, ingest all these different log sources into log analytics. And of course, this also applies to Azure Active Directory. There's a lot of activity logs that we need to collect to figure out user behavior, who's signing into Azure Active Directory, and also what applies into Intune as well. So if you're using Intune Endpoint Manager to actually update a multi-session desktop host, we want to get notified if someone made a change to the Windows Update for Business schedule in Intune as well, so we can collect that as part of log analytics. But of course, a lot of these logs are enabled by default, and then you can also go in and customize them to actually send data to a centralized log analytics workspace. And then you also have a lot of log sources that are not enabled by default. Of course, Azure Resource Manager will give you information of a notification of any changes that have been made to subscription, because they want to get notified if someone deletes a host pool or makes some changes to a workspace. And of course, you have also the other diagnostic settings that you need to enable as well for the host pool, the workspace, other services that you're using in Azure, Azure Files. You have the network security group flow logs, which gives you information about traffic going in and out. So again, all these additional or optional, I would say, log sources are not enabled by default, but a lot of them, depending on security requirements, should be enabled to be collected into log analytics. Now, in order to understand what kind of data do you need to have, it's important to understand what kind of data is being generated by different data sources. So for instance, if you have a virtual machine that is publicly available as a public IP, of course, and you need to understand, okay, who has been able to access this specific virtual machine. So just to showcase what kind of information you get from the different services within Azure. So if you have, for instance, Azure Defender, if someone's been trying to brute force their way into that specific VM, Azure Defender can give you information about saying that, okay, there's malicious traffic coming from this IP address trying to come into that specific VM using this specific username at that given time. If you had the network flow logs enabled as well, it would showcase the traffic flow if the traffic was accepted or blocked. It can also give you information about what kind of country origin the traffic was coming from, or how much traffic that was going back and forth. So you can look at the flow logs similar to NetFlow or any other type of IP flow log monitoring tool. And then you have VM Connect, which is part of Virtual Machine Insight, which used to be called Service Map, which used to be called Bluestrip, but essentially it monitors the processes and the traffic flow within the VM. So it can then give you insights showing that, okay, this specific service or this specific process accepted a connection on port 3389. And of course, the last one is collecting the event logs, which can either be done using Sentinel or using Defender, which can give you information about what's actually happened and what was being collected by the event log itself, showcasing that, okay, this specific user logged in with this specific username from this IP address. So of course, if you want to have the full overview, you need to have all these different data sources in place. And the last 3 years, I've been working a lot of ransomware cases where the initial entry point has been Azure. So of course, we need to have all these logs in place to actually figure out what's going on. When it comes to log analytics itself, as talked about, it's essentially a database. So it's collecting all the different data from these different data sources into a database, and it's storing that data in different tables. And then you have a concept of something called QStore queries, which is essentially a read-only database query that you can read and use to analyze the data that's being collected. Now, Log Analytics by default stores data for 30 days. Now, if you install Sentinel, which is a module or solution on top of Log Analytics, it's automatically expanded upon to 90 days, but you can define a custom retention period. One thing is important to understand that ingesting data into Log Analytics will take some time. I'm not saying it takes a lot of hours, but it takes a couple of minutes, depending on what kind of data source that you're actually collecting. So if you have like agents installed on virtual machines, might take between 12 or 5 to 15 minutes before the data or the data is actually collected and uploaded to Log Analytics. So working with Azure and Log Analytics in general, you need to have some patience. But with Log Analytics, we can essentially collect any type of event log from virtual machines. You can either use syslog, you can collect Azure Platform Service logs, Azure Active Directory as mentioned. It cannot, however, collect security events by default, not if you're using native Log Analytics. You either need to have Sentinel in place, or you need to use Azure Defender. You can't define the collection from both. And when you enable this, you need to specify what kind of security events you want to collect. So you have 4 options. Either you don't collect anyone, or you can specify minimum, common, or all events that are being generated in security events. Now, of course, up until now, Azure or Log Analytics has been using an architecture based upon System Center Operation Manager. So we installed an agent on a VM, and it authenticates to the Azure service using a workspace ID and a workspace key. But now Microsoft is replacing this and moving with managed identity instead, and it's also moving more than the information flow to Azure Monitor instead. So this was GA from last week, if I remember correctly. Now, if you are using Log Analytics, and the best practice for Microsoft is having as few workspaces as possible. But of course, if you install Sentinel on top, you will be billed for all the data that's being analyzed or ingested into Log Analytics. Now you can also, however, by default, the retention is for all the data that's being collected, but you can also, however, define a retention per table. So let's say that I don't want to have all my performance metrics or specific logs stored for 1 year. I want to have like last 30 days or last 10 days. I can also define a custom retention per table. It's only available using REST API, however. So I have a blog post written for that to showcase how you can change the retention time. And also all the different data that's being, or different data that's collected from different services in Azure has their own logs format, log syntax, or structure is a better word for it. So it's important that you have, if you have specific queries in place, they need to be adjusted according to what kind of different data you're querying. For instance, like the VPN gateway has its own formatting and what kind of attributes that it's collecting compared to what Azure Firewall has been collecting instead. Now, the way we use this is that we have automatically deployed Log Analytics with Sentinel and monitoring or different rules on top. But you can also export data on activity logs from Log Analytics to any third-party tool. Most commonly one is Splunk or QRadar, which uses Event Hub, which is essentially a messaging queue. It sends out all the activities there. And then Splunk or QRadar can just go collect the events from there as well and ingest them into their system as well. So as I mentioned, Sentinel is one of the modules that we can install. There is also a bunch of other solutions that we can install on Log Analytics. Update Management is one of them, which is Windows Server Update Services Lite edition, I would say. It's only applicable for Windows servers, but I'll get back to it a little bit later. We also have anti-malware. So when you're running virtual machines, Windows virtual machines in Azure, you can install the anti-malware extension, essentially the anti-malware agent. But the anti-malware solution in Log Analytics will give you visualization and also give you a visualization if there's any threats detected or what's going on when it comes to protection status and updates and so on. We also have change tracking and file tracking. It will monitor if there's been any file changes to the operating system, any changes to the services, changes to the registry, and so on. And also we have DNS Analytics, which is only applicable for DNS servers, but it will give you information if there's been any DNS lookups to malicious domains. So Log Analytics is collecting the DNS server log and comparing the DNS requests to what Microsoft has from the Security Graph API or Intelligent Security Graph API is the right name, to see if there's been any known malicious domains activity there. So if you want to install any additional solutions on Log Analytics, so using Terraform, it's quite simple as long as you have the Log Analytics workspace in place. I have that on the next slide, but you just define the solution name. So in this example, I just want to add the anti-malware solution on top. So you can just replace the name with the different solutions that you want to install. Same applies for Sentinel. So essentially since Sentinel is just a solution, you just define the name Security Insights. That also applies if you want to remove Sentinel afterwards. You just remove the Security Insights solution. The Sentinel instance will disappear, but not the Log Analytics workspace and not the data underneath. So once you have Sentinel in place, you also need to define analytics rules. So because by default, Sentinel is just a blank shell. It just sits there and has all the data, but you need to create analytics rules to determine what you're actually looking for. Now, there are a bunch of templates that we can use that Microsoft has available. This is one example showcasing that, okay, I want to create an analytics rule which looks into the Windows event log, the security logs for event ID 4625. So there's a pop quiz for you to figure out what event ID 4625 implies. But we can also use Sentinel there to deploy these analytics rules. So it can automatically, based upon, let's say, the last 30 minutes, look up if there's been any failed logon attempts to Active Directory and then automatically do something. So we can assign or create an analytics rule, which can have a playbook attached to it. A playbook is something that will run if an incident occurs. And with Sentinel, playbooks are based upon logic apps. So it can be either creating a ticket in a ServiceNow instance or ITSM tool, or it can be blocking the user, locking out the user from Active Directory. So only the limited of the imagination, I guess. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of predefined hunting queries that you can download from Microsoft directly, available under GitHub repository. Sentinel can also generate incidents automatically based upon other Microsoft security products that you might have. So Cloud App Security, for instance, can also be created by Sentinel, or Terraform, I mean. This is another example, just showcasing what a Kusto query looks like, how you analyze the data. Because a lot of the stuff that we do within the Azure portal is based upon Kusto queries. Even the workbooks that you see in the Azure portal is based upon Kusto queries underneath. So this is an example looking into the table sign-in logs. Sign-in logs is the Azure Active Directory audit data audit table. And here I'm essentially filtering based upon, okay, the last 14 days, who has been signing in to application named Azure Portal or Windows Virtual Desktop Client, with the specific result ID being two specific IDs, which are either invalid username or password, or user does not exist within tenant. That is typically when someone's just trying to brute force their way and trying a set of different usernames and passwords within the portal. So this is one example that we typically use as part of the deployment when we deploy Sentinel and built-in security analytics rules. Log Analytics also supports ingesting external data. So it can, for instance, collect or use external CSV files with IP addresses. In this example, it has looks up external IP addresses, creates a list for known as malicious domains and the malicious IPs. And then it essentially does the same. Looks into the sign-in logs, looks if IP addresses matches something that's part of the blocked list. And if there's a result there, it would generate an incident. But that way we know there's someone from a malicious IP address trying to get on the inside. Now, I'm not going to talk so much about logic apps because it's not a simple way to deploy this using Terraform at the moment. The simplest way of doing this is, and this is one of the limitations that has been with Terraform, because of course, by default, there's not support for all the native features in Azure. So what we've been doing there is that we created the ARM template and we essentially wrapped it into a Terraform syntax, and then we deployed the ARM template within Terraform. It's not the prettiest thing to see, but it works. But within Log Analytics, as I said, when you create an analytics rule in Sentinel, it can automatically trigger a logic app playbook. And what we typically do is that when it generates an incident, it will automatically create an incident in our ITSM tool. So we're using a functionality in Azure called Secure Export, which provides a unidirectional connection between Azure and ServiceNow. So that way, when incident creates in ServiceNow, we can update the incident, close the ticket in ServiceNow, and it will automatically close the incident in Sentinel as well. So now I've been focusing a lot on the security part. Then we have more of the monitoring aspect, where of course Azure Monitor is a key part here. Now, as part of Azure Monitor, many might be familiar with this already when it comes to action groups. So you can create a lot of monitoring rules. So essentially looking into, okay, I want to monitor if my the CPU usage of these VMs is going to a certain threshold. If so, then I want to trigger an action. Now, and of course, when you create these monitoring rules, you can also create action groups which define, okay, what should be done when we reach this certain threshold. One is that it creates an alert in Azure Monitor, and then you can then also create playbooks that are attached to it. So logic apps, you can use Azure Automation, you can use Azure Functions, or you can also use this with ITSM tools. So you can use a combination of multiple things. So depending on what kind of incident what kind of incident that's being created, we typically use a combination of ITSM tools to create an incident there. but also use Azure Automation to maybe resize a disk or restart a specific process or restart a VM if something's going on. So you can use also a combination of different action groups for specific alerts as well. And again, Azure monitoring and alerting rules can also be created directly using Terraform. So when it comes to monitoring for AVD, of course, it's important to enable diagnostics in all the resources that you're using, regardless if it's just AVD and not anything else. But if you're using Azure NetApp files or Azure files, please make sure that you enabled diagnostic settings and collect this into a centralized workspace. So for instance, for host pools, of course, you have the management activities, which can showcase who's made changes to a host pool. This will also appear as part of the Azure activity log. But all the data that's being generated by diagnostics that you enable on AVD will by default have a table name or table prefix called WVD. Now, I also seen some cases where you enable it, it doesn't show up in Log Analytics right away. Now, it also takes some time before the initial table is actually available. So it might save you some time if you go into the advanced pane of Log Analytics and enable show tables with no data, because that way you can show that the table is there, but it might take some time before the events and activities actually getting in there. Also, the WVD checkpoint table will not collect any data if you're using only full desktops. It's only for applications or published application that will generate an incident there. Also, if you have any activities within the WVD errors which service error true, it's typically something that you need to take up with Microsoft because there's something underlying with the WVD service that might have an issue. Azure policies, maybe for the sake of time, I might skip these, but I have some slides on that as well. One thing I want to cover, however, when it comes to, because a lot of companies and organizations that we're working on are very good at using Azure policies to define a baseline of their governance. But what they're not so good at is actually following up on non-compliant resources. Of course, policy management in Azure typically implies that you need to go into the portal and look into non-compliant resources. But there is, however, also a possibility that you can push the data into Log Analytics and then use monitoring tools there and monitoring capabilities there as well to actually generate alerts into your favorite monitoring ITSM tool based upon non-compliant resources. I actually have a blog post showcasing how you can build that up. Then we have Azure Defender, which has a lot of different functionalities or key features. I would say. One is that they provide threat detection against multiple different services within Azure, so virtual infrastructure, SQL databases, web applications, Azure files or storage accounts, and so on. Just to give an example of one customer that was compromised a couple of years ago within Azure Security Center, where Microsoft detected that there was malicious traffic going in and out from our from that customer virtual infrastructure, and then Microsoft notified us based upon the Security Graph API. So we saw that was suspicious SSH traffic going out. Now, Azure Defender also provides security assessments, so it can, based upon like compliance reports, PCI DSS compliance, for instance. It can also provide secure score, and it's generally look over the overall environment and give you recommendations on what kind of additional components functionality that can use to reduce the overall risk. It would also, for servers, install the Windows Defender ADP client. Now, for those that are familiar with the Defender ADP client for Windows Server, it doesn't support vulnerability scanning. So what Microsoft did here is that they entered a partnership with Qualys. So they will provide application vulnerability scanning for Windows servers in Azure free as part of the Azure Defender cost, which is close to $12 a month per host, if I remember correctly. Security Center also has just-in-time access. Please don't use that. We've seen so many bugs with NSG rules that have been been orphaned, so essentially opening up servers for the entire world. So please use Azure Bastion instead. So what kind of functionality should I be using? Should I use Sentinel? Should I use Defender? Or should I use both? Of course, they can provide in certain circumstances the same data set, but there are different approaches to it. As I said, Sentinel can collect a lot of data, but it's essentially a blank shell if you're not using it in building analytics rules. Azure Defender will do a lot of threat monitoring, and another example that we used, I think it was a couple of months ago, when there was a vulnerability in the Citrix ADC or NetScaler, which allowed attackers to use it for reverse DDoS attacks. So I actually got notified from Azure Defender that our DDoS or NetScaler instances were sending out UDP traffic. And that is not something that I would be able to collect from Azure Sentinel without having a lot of predefined rules in place. Azure Update Management, as mentioned, can provide a WSUS Lite for Windows servers. One thing I also want to mention is that now you can either use update management for Windows servers and use Windows or Intune for multi-user sessions. And a new service which was also introduced not so long ago was also something called Azure Auto Manage, which essentially creates a security or best practice baseline for management of Windows Server machines in Azure. So enables security baseline, enables a lot of the different other components that we talked about, and it automatically sets up Azure Backup, antivirus, and automatic patching. So Microsoft is responsible for deploying the patches as soon as they're available. Now, if we employ or start using Auto Manage, the only thing that we can actually customize is Azure Backup retention and anti-malware policies. When it comes to, let's say, the virtual machine security, of course, boot diagnostic should be enabled. You should have the anti-malware extension and use the anti-malware solution in Log Analytics. Update management, of course, if you're using servers, use VM Insight will give you a lot of useful information. Of course, if you have stateful servers in Azure, like Active Directory or other databases or other application servers, also use Azure Backup. We've been also using Veeam Backup for certain customers in Azure, but we typically deploy Azure Backup and also using Azure policies. So when we deploy a VM in Azure with backup tag equals true, then it will automatically be added to the default backup policy that we have in Azure. Now, when it comes to monitoring AVD and VMs, as I said, we typically use VM Insight to show a look into the different processes and traffic flow, because sometimes we get some unexpected traffic behavior and we're not able to understand it straight away. And VM Insight, Microsoft is building more capabilities into this, and to also be able to monitor processes inside the VM, but it's not quite there yet. What we've also been doing is using Sysmon, which is an open source tool for Microsoft, to actually, with predefined filters, monitor different processes inside the VM. So if a certain process stops, it will automatically generate an event ID, which will then be uploaded to Log Analytics, and then we have a monitoring tool there as well to catch up all those process stops. Of course, most commonly deployment is using the AVD workbook, which will automatically enable and start collecting events, enable diagnostic settings on the workspace itself, or host pools. We'll also start uploading the specific event logs from the Windows event logs, such as print services, terminal services, FS Logic, and so on. You can also customize to collect other types of data sources or events that you might have as well. When it comes to networking, as I said, I haven't had so much difficulties with the networking there. It's pretty much stable, but sometimes I want to monitor from the actual environment itself and third-party services, such as Office 365, so I don't get any unexpected delays or errors or latency there. I've been typically, if I have like a stateful or persistent VM or server, I typically use the network performance monitoring tool, also part of Log Analytics, just solution there, and it has built-in tests for Office 365. And I typically also use that to monitor against on-premises environments as well. So monitor packet loss, latency between multiple locations. Also, if you're using traditional VPN gateway, it also has external health probe available on the public IP, which I also typically monitor just to get information about the status of the VPN gateway. And also, I also set up monitoring for a lot of the external domain name or external URLs for AVD. It's not that I just don't trust Microsoft, but sometimes I want to get notified before someone goes ranting on social media that something's going down. And of course, the status page from Microsoft is not something that's automatically reflecting the actual status. So I also use an external monitoring tool that we deploy and manage through Terraform to actually monitor the availability of these 3 URLs, just to make sure that I get notified if there's overall latency issues or availability issues for these services. Yeah, in the aspect of time, I'm just going to skip through some of these. Now, Security Graph API, typically something that we always deploy. So it's just a simple logic app playbook that runs on a specific schedule. If there's a Security Graph API alert, which is triggered from one of these bunch of security products that Microsoft has, it will automatically create an incident within our ITSM tool. So that's always something that I recommend that you deploy in every environment. Conditional access, also important. Don't use the portal. Please deploy conditional access policies as code, because that way you have versioning, much easier to make changes, and also now possible through the new graph module from Microsoft as well. Just one bit of advice that you don't rerun the script multiple times, because it doesn't difference, or you can have multiple policies with the same name. It's just a different UI at the end. What about Windows 11? Because I'm guessing, including myself, now I've been running Windows 11 preview for the last couple of days. There's going to be some interesting changes there, and I'll most likely also affect AVD. Not quite sure yet, but as part of Windows 11, it's natively integrated into something called the Azure Attestation Service, because one of the requirements for Windows 11 is that you have TPM 1.2 hardware chip and also secure boot enabled. So what this is going to include as part of Azure Attestation Service is that it's going to be looking into the overall status of the physical or the Windows 11 machine, and then send, let's say, an evidence of the security to the Azure service. So this will also typically be used for conditional access tool sometime in the future, after Windows 11 is launched, I reckon. Now, with these requirements, like TPM, of course, they are not, when you install Windows 11 on a VM, you'll get a warning saying it's not recommended that you run Windows 11 without these specific requirements. But my guess is that it will be recommended by Microsoft to also use the same type of functionality, secure boot, in Azure as well. But that will require that you use a new feature called Trusted Launch in Azure, because that will give VMs the capabilities to get virtual TPM chips, which is compliant with the TPM2 specifications. And it also enables secure boot. But as of now, this feature is still in preview. It's only available for certain SKUs and also in certain regions as well. But again, we have plenty of time. Windows 10 was build supported to the end of 2025, so we have some time to get to this, start testing. I have some best practices. I'm going to skip those. One thing that I want to mention at the end, because this is something that's taking up much of the time today, and that's printing. Many of you might already heard about it, but something called dubbed print nightmare, essentially a high severity vulnerability that can potentially from any authenticated user in the Active Directory, bypassing a vulnerability in the print spooler service to actually get full system access to an Active Directory domain. So as of now, the overall recommendation is that you just disable the print service or the print spooler service on domain controllers. And there are also some other mitigations that you can apply for other services as well, for, let's say, AVD or Citrix environments as well, just to make sure that you're safe. So there's no patch yet. We just need to hope that not someone is trying to apply this vulnerability as part of a ransomware attack or other types of targeted attacks before vacation starts. So with that, Neil, I think that was a speed run from my end. I think I need to breathe, but I think I got through it within, well, close to 45 minutes.
Awesome. Great session. Really, really good content. So thank you very much for that. And does anyone have any questions for Marius? He's obviously a security god with his knowledge. He knows a lot. I've just learned. So
at night.
Yeah. So, but is there anything in the chat window? Let's have a look.
See, there's a lot of talk about Terraform versus Bicep and so on.
Yeah, what's your thoughts about that? I mean, what do you prefer?
Well, I think that when Microsoft introduced Bicep, it was trying to mimic Terraform in terms of simplicity. But again, it's going to be Azure only. And if I actually remember that a few years ago that Ignite that Microsoft introduced a Terraform provider for ARM, but that has since then gone away. But like our approach to using Terraform, of course, we understand there will be limitations with new services that Microsoft will be introducing, which will be natively supported by ARM and Bicep. But for us, we see that we can use Terraform to essentially do anything across different cloud providers. It's not that all organizations will be going into multi-cloud, but from a service provider perspective, it makes things easier for us when we're trying to make sure that we have the right knowledge, the right people, and the right expertise.
Cool. Well, we're towards the end of the night. I appreciate it's gone over a bit. 2 amazing sessions. So really, really happy with those sessions that we've had. If guys want to stay and do a Q&A and chat, you're welcome to, or we can end it. It's entirely up to you guys.
I can follow up with some questions or answer some questions here.
Okay.
I see that Mike asks a question. If you pump a lot of data into log analytics, are you going to get a massive cost with Sentinel? Yes. All the data that's being ingested into log analytics will automatically be billed by Sentinel as well. So if you have performance data, like as I said, the best practice for Microsoft is having as few workspaces as possible. But if you have data that's only like performance metrics, it's not useful to ingest that into Sentinel. But have a separate workspace, move that performance metrics there. Either that, or you define a specific retention for that specific table where the data is being collected. So that way you don't get billed for performance metrics the last year.
Yeah, it could get extremely expensive. If you imagine, like, obviously we talk about the size of like University of Glasgow deployment, talking about session 1. Imagine turning on all that for Sentinel for all those hosts and all those sessions. It would be a lot of data, I would have thought.
We had to reserve instance the log analytics because there's that much data going through it.
Right.
So just paid up front for the storage.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, does anyone get any other questions from Marius, or is anything else that you guys want to talk about before we call it a night?
See, either Rachel has a question in terms of estimate cost of monitoring on Azure. Yeah, well, it's I have a lot of experience with using the Azure Price Calculator, to be honest. It's kind of hard, especially if you're using Azure Monitor, because you have to pay for the cost in terms of data ingestion or log analytics, and then you have based upon notification rules and also based upon actions. So what we've actually been doing is that when we generate, or we have a lot of predefined alerts, so we know the overall cost per rule. So that way, when we deploy, let's say, a customer, we know that all these rules are going to be costing us this amount of dollars per month. The problem is that if there's notifications in addition, so we need to notify someone on Teams and Slack, and there's always these variable costs that will apply. So it's we don't have like the correct answer straight away, but we have like a 90% estimate most times.
I've got a question for Nathan, actually, from the previous session, if that's all right. Can you hear me?
Yeah, still there.
Yeah, cool, good. So, I mean, Nathan, you mentioned all that stuff about AVD, but I'm working on a project at the moment, and I can't work out how to do the updates for those session hosts as best as possible. I've got sort of config manager deploying the apps to the session hosts, but that takes a little while every time I spin one up, and if I sort of tear them down every month or every couple of weeks when I need to update an app, is that the best way to do it, or am I missing something?
That's the way we do it, yeah. So there's, in this particular use case, there's 16 images that the guys are maintaining, because it was easier for them to do that than FS Logic's app masking in this case. A lot of our other customers use that and probably maintain 1 or 2 images. But in this case, what the guys do is they've got a source image VM in Azure, which is domain joined. And they apply their monthly patches to that, and they use WVD admin to sysprep and capture those images each time. So I don't know if you've come across that little community tool from help me out, guys. WVD admin.
Yeah,
guys.
I've got a mental blockage as well. I know exactly who it is, but
all right.
Oh, Marcel.
I had a brain freeze and talked to him quite often.
I can only remember Hydra.
Yeah. Well, that's his new thing. But download a little community tool called WVD admin. Use that to sysprep and capture your images, and that is the quickest win I can see for you right now. And then,
I mean, that was the problem. The capturing destroyed the donor VM that I was using, and that just threw me completely.
So what it'll do basically is it'll snapshot the disk, deploy a temporary VM, and then sysprep capture that temporary VM. Means you can always go back to your source VM. Yeah. Quickest win, greatest community tool I've ever used in AVD, and it's free. Because the process to do that, clicking buttons in Azure or running PowerShell scripts, is a nightmare. But the next thing on your use case is, depending on how complex the app installations are on those images, is potentially look at Azure Image Builder, because you can automate that. But again, like I said on the call, that's only as powerful as the scripts you run with Image Builder.
Yeah. Cool, brilliant. Thank you for that.
No worries. I'll send you the link to that WVD admin tool.
Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else want to ask any questions? Still lots of conversations going on, which is good. This is what I like to see. Okay. Last chance for questions before we call it an evening.
Not a question, but I don't want to keep this for too long. But I love the idea of the community stuff you're doing, the stuff you mentioned at the start, the newsletter, the YouTube channel stuff. That I think that's going to really build this.
I hope so. I want it to be a complete one-stop place where you can get all the information that you need, essentially, and build a proper community. So rather than just a newsletter. So very excited, very much looking forward to it. So it's going to be lots of fun, lots of time, lots of effort, but worth it. Okay, guys. Last chance before questions. No? Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for tonight. For me, this has been one of the best sessions that we've had. 2 really, really great sessions, lots of Q&A, lots of interaction, which is exactly what I want. So thank you for coming. Thank you for the questions. This is recorded, so I'll send out the recording probably tomorrow. And I think I'm definitely going to do a follow-up session for the University of Glasgow with Nathan potentially and all the other cert guys, and because I know there's a lot of outstanding questions that weren't due to answer because of time, but I think it's definitely worth a sort of deep dive technical session on that as well. If you're interested in doing that, Nathan, with your guys as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a techie guy and I want to talk tech.
Okay, cool. All right, we'll get that organised. We'll get that on the calendar. Maybe for August or the month after or something, and I think people will be really interested in that.
No worries.
Okay, all right, well, I'm going to call it a night. Thanks for coming, and hopefully see most of you on next month's session. So thanks, Marius, for your session.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Good help. Cheers.
Thanks,
Right. Thanks, cheers, bye-bye.